Joseph Raymond McCarthy was born on November 14, 1908, in Appleton, Wisconsin. He earned his law degree from Marquette University in 1935 and won the race for judgeship of the 10th Circuit Court of Wisconsin a few years later, at the age of 30, which is the youngest age a judge has ever been elected. In July of 1942, McCarthy entered World War II as a first lieutenant of the Marines. While on active duty, he ran for the Republican nomination of Wisconsin. He did not win the nomination. However, in 1946, McCarthy beat Senator Robert M. La Follette Jr. in an upset to become the youngest member of the Senate at the time. His first term as senator was uneventful. He mostly stayed under the radar, working on housing legislation and sugar rationing through the end of the war. After World War II ended, however, the anti-fascist, anti-German sentiments from the war morphed into anti-communist sentiments, fueled by the consumerist society that boomed as a result of saved money from the war, and gave McCarthy an outlet for his re-election campaign. Make the people afraid of an actual threat and offer yourself as the solution. Main influences for this campaign strategy were high-profile espionage cases and suspected communist infiltration before and during 1950. In February of 1950, Joseph McCarthy gave a campaign speech at the Ohio County Women's Republican Club in Wheeling, West Virginia, in which he claimed that communists were invading the federal government, universities, and even the film industry. Most notably, McCarthy claimed that 205 communists had invaded the State Department, and he had a list of 57 of them. This was the beginning of an era known as the Red Scare. McCarthy was re-elected in 1952 and, as a result of his claims, was made chairman of the Senate's Committee on Government Operations. His position allowed him to investigate suspected communists and question them before the Senate Committee on charges of communism, being sympathetic toward communists, displaying disloyalty, or sex crimes. McCarthy had almost no substantial evidence for his claims, but many people were still convicted of their un-American crimes, and over 2,000 people lost their jobs as a result of McCarthy's allegations. The Red Scare made up most of McCarthy's political career, but he also created another lesser-known movement, the Lavender Scare. Homosexuality was illegal during the 1950s, and McCarthy made it his mission to root out any threat to government morals, using the reasoning that because homosexuality was illegal, anyone who was a member of the LGBT community could be blackmailed by communists to become disloyal. He even made a list of government workers who looked gay to persecute as a threat to the government. His efforts were aided by President Eisenhower, who signed Executive Order 10450, allowing the persecution of any suspected gays or people who appeared to be gay. Public support for McCarthy and his policies began to dwindle after this point, beginning with a segment on See It Now, a television show hosted by Edward Murrow that depicted McCarthy as a power-hungry bully. Public opinion turned further away from McCarthy and his crusade in April of 1954 when he decided to expose communism in the armed forces with a 36-day hearing on national television in which members of the U.S. Army were put on trial for disloyalty. At one point during the proceedings, Joseph Nye Welch asked, "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Have you left no sense of decency?" His comment, along with the entire trial, showed that McCarthy had overstepped his authority as a representative and turned the majority of public opinions against him. After being discredited at the hearings, McCarthy was stripped of his chairmanship on December 2, 1954. He was condemned and censored for vulgar, insulting, inexcusable, reprehensible, and unbecoming behavior contrary to Senate traditions. A few years later, McCarthy died in Bethesda, Maryland due to liver problems at the age of 48, plagued by his reputation and unable to finish the term that he started the Red Scare for. McCarthy played to the common fears of the public at the time. He used the Cold War to his advantage. His tactics reflected the era in which he served, and his ideas were not as far-fetched as people seem to believe. Had he employed more subtlety to his crusade, he likely would have been more successful, and his career may not have ended in censorship, because the popular notion of the time influenced his claims of disloyalty and allowed him to become a figure of power. The Red Scare was a campaign strategy that the public fell for. McCarthy was influential in American ideology not because he was a bad person that no one agreed with or because he abused his position of power at the expense of others, but because he represented the popular ideology of the time and his policies reflected American behavior, however exaggerated they may have been.